What is going on, Chess YouTube? In today's video, I want to show you one of Magnus Carlsen's latest games in the Freestyle Friday tournament. This one is against Arjun Erigaisi, and it was a good one. All right, Freestyle Friday. We have the kings on G1 and G8, the rooks surrounding the kings, and of course, the bishops in the center and over here on the queen's side. Now, whenever you have the rooks and the kings all cornered in one side of the board like this, the move H4 makes a lot of sense, and that is what Magnus goes for in this game. Now, beyond H4, D4, C4, and knight to B3 are the main computer moves, but in the game, one H4 was played, also a very good move. Now here Arjun, he is concerned about the Alpha 0 style attack, H4, H5, H6, therefore he does go H5 himself, blocking the attack immediately on the king side. Now here Magnus, D4 is the move, breaking in the center, black goes D5 as well, and now we have the move C4 in the spirit of the queen's gambit. Of course, this C4 pawn is being supported by the queen on the C1 square. Therefore, it's not really a queen's gambit, but it is sort of in the spirit of it. All right, here black takes in the spirit of the queen's gambit accepted. And now here, shockingly, the computer does not like the idea of queen takes c4 at all. Instead, the idea it likes, you know what, good time for a puzzle. If you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find the really weird computer line in this position. And while you're at it, go and smash that YouTube like button for more videos like this one. All right, here, the insane idea. You want to go knight to e3. What is the idea? You are challenging the pawn on c4 with the knight. Black can defend it with the move knight b6, but then you want to go knight to f5, bringing the knight over to the king side. You're threatening bishop c3, applying pressure on g7. The queen's ready to go to g5, threatening g7 also. It's a really weird way to start the attack on the king side, not to mention the potential rook lift, say f3 and so on. But anyway, instead in the game, queen takes c4 was chosen, the safer move, but this turns out to be a little bit dubious, as here black can simply bring out the knight, knight to b6 played in the game by Arjun Erigaisi, the Indian superstar, pressuring the queen on c4. Now, where is the queen going to go? In the game, queen to c3 was chosen, dropping back with the queen. Not a bad idea at all. Now, here Arjun, rook to h6 is the move. The rook lift on the 6th rank, potentially intending, I don't know, maybe rook d6 in the spirit of the Tate opening. Very interesting idea. All right, now Magnus, bishop d2, pressuring the rook on h6 immediately. Not a bad move at all. Then we have rook d6 sliding over with the rook. Now here, queen d3 by Magnus Carlsen, a very cheeky idea. I showed this at the very start of the video here. Excuse me, the idea being, of course, you are threatening checkmate in one move on h7, and of course, black is going to have to defend against that. He plays the strongest move, g6. Now, this move does weaken the king side. Of course, this dark squared bishop, it is nowhere close to g7. It is so far away from being fianchettoed. Therefore, black's king side is going to be a little bit weak throughout this game, and you know, we're seeing maybe some questionable ideas here. The idea of rook h6 to d6, the rook does leave the defense of the king side, and it may makes it a little bit harder to defend. All right, now Magnus, knight b3 is the move, developing his knight. Black goes knight to e6. Both sides getting their knights to very weird squares in terms of classical chess principles. Now we have bishop h6 pressuring the rook on f8. And here the only way to block the attack is going to be knight g7. If you don't play that, then you do lose the exchange, that being the rook for the bishop on the spot. But here Arjun, he calculates everything out. This guy is a madman at the chessboard, very aggressive player. He does not try to defend the rook at all. Instead, the move played in the game is going to be c5, expanding on the queen side. Now we have bishop takes f8, trading the bishop for the rook on the f8 square. And now here Arjun, c4 is the move, expanding on the queen side, trying to fork the queen and the knight. Of course, there is simply no time for white to try and keep that bishop alive. It's got nowhere to go, or does it? Well, it turns out you don't have time to move it. Here in this position, queen c3 was played by Magnus. You have to get the queen out of the attack. And now black goes c takes b3, offering the queen trade. Now there is this tension with the queens on the c file. White, of course, can trade on c8. Black, of course, has the option of trading on c3. But here the computer, instead of trading, it gives the unbelievable intermediate move, bishop takes e7. The point being, you're hitting the rook on d6 with tempo, and you get the bishop out of the attack by the king on the f8 square. A really cool idea. Magnus, unfortunately, didn't see it in the game. Instead, queen takes c8 was played, and here is the problem with this move. After knight takes c8, the knight defends the pawn directly on e7, And that means any kind of bishop takes e7 idea is simply not going to work here. All right, the only way to keep the bishop alive now is to go bishop h6. That is what Magnus does in the game. So bishop h6, keeping that bishop alive. And now Arjun, knight takes d4 is the move, gobbling up that free pawn. Of course, Magnus is still up the exchange. He won the rook on the f8 square. Meanwhile, Black won a minor piece. Black has the 2 knights and the 2 bishops versus the 2 bishops and the single knight of Magnus. But of course, Arjun does have 1 pawn to help compensate a little bit for the material deficit. All right, now Magnus, knight c3 is the move, jumping up with his knight. Black goes rook to c6, putting some pressure on the open C file here. Of course, there were some stronger ideas. The computer loves the idea of b5, potentially threatening an immediate b4, but instead, rook c6 was played in the game. All right, now here, Magnus, he's got to get his rooks on h1 and f1 into the game as soon as possible. In the game, he could not resist the rook lift, rook to h3, a very thematic idea, potentially intending rook to e3 or rook to d3. Now, instead of this, rook d1 immediately may have been a little bit stronger, immediately pressuring the knight on d4 and forcing a more immediate response from Black. Instead, rook h3 played in the game, threatening those 2 squares. Now Black takes on a2, b takes a2 was played in the game. Now we have bishop takes a2, the bishop coming to live on this diagonal and opposing the Black king on g8, and of course, pinning that pawn on f7 to the king. Now Black, bishop e5 is the move, developing his bishop. And here again, rook d1 is an option. Rook e3 is also an option, pressuring the bishop on the e5 square. Instead, rook d1 played in the game, again, simply pressuring that knight immediately. Now here we have knight to d6. The knight jumps up towards the center of the board. Sure enough, rook to e3, the best placement for the rook, pressuring the bishop on e5. And now Black finally gets the bishop back where it can cover these dark squares. Bishop h8 was played in the game, and surprisingly, the bishop, well, maybe not surprisingly, this bishop is now incredibly active on this long diagonal. It defends the knight on d4. It puts some pressure on c3 and b2. And overall, it's tucked away in the corner where it really can't be attacked. And of course, White's bishop on h6 is not nearly as effective in this position. So Arjun finding a really good placement. But overall, Magnus here, of course, being up the exchange, up the rook for the extra knight. Magnus is going to be a little bit better in this, you know, multi-piece endgame, let's call it. All right, now here, Magnus, knight d5. He jumps in with the knight, and Arjun finds the best way to try and get counterplay. That is simply the move, rook to c2, flying in with the rook, pressuring both e2 and b2. Now, both these pawns are technically hanging. The b2 pawn, of course, is not defended at all, and the one on e2 is only defended by the white rook on the e3 square. All right, now we have knight takes e7. The knight wins the pawn on the e7 square and puts the king on g8 under check immediately. Then we have king to h7, getting out of the check. And here, bishop g5. Magnus trying to find a better square for his bishop, keeping it alive, and it does put some pressure on this diagonal. All right, now here, Arjun, he shows the idea of rook to c2. He takes the pawn on the b2 square, rook takes b2, and now here, Magnus, of course, with this extra pawn on the e file, he still is up a little bit of material. He still has the exchange for the 1 extra pawn of Arjun, but now Arjun has those connected passed pawns on the queen side. Those pawns are going to be very difficult to stop, and Magnus, on the other hand, is a very long ways away from getting a passed pawn of his own. So Arjun managing to really fight back in this game. Very impressive stuff. All right, bishop d5 is the move, pressuring b7 immediately. Then we have knight takes e2, gobbling up that pawn on the e2 square, and of course, putting the king in an immediate check. Now we have king to h1, the king slides over, knight to c3, the knight drops back and pressures the rook on the d1 square. We have rook d to e1, the rook slides over, bishop d4, the bishop flies down and pressures the rook on the e3 square. Then rook to f3, the rook slides over, applies some pressure on f7. Of course, the bishop and the rook here are applying quite a bit of pressure on that pawn right now. All right, here, Black. Rook takes f2 is the move, gobbling up that pawn immediately. Then we have rook takes and bishop takes f2. Now, rook to f1 slides over the rook and pressures the bishop on the f2 square. Knight d to e4. The knight jumps in and defends the bishop. Very important. Of course, White can take the knight on e4 immediately, but then Black can take back. And again, he is defending the bishop on the f2 square. All right, here, Magnus. He's starting to be under a little bit of pressure. Arjun is really picking up the pace. And in this position, Magnus, it's really critical to find the right continuation. Of course, bishop takes e4 is not ideal. You don't really want to give up that bishop pair unless you have to, but it is playable. You can do it. For example, bishop takes, knight takes, then rook to b1, pressuring b7, and taking advantage of the fact the knight on c3 is no longer on c3. That is one decent idea. However, overall, the computer likes rook to c1 the most, getting the rook to the active c file, threatening bishop takes, and then perhaps an infiltration on the open c file. Now, instead of that, here Magnus goes king to h2, and this move is a fatal mistake in this position because Arjun Erigaisi, he is about to just completely take over in this game. It's really remarkable how fast he just completely dominates, as you can see by the eBalvar collapsing. And again, if you like puzzles, try to find the next 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 moves for Arjun to just completely take over here. And now, of course, Magnus, he only had 4 seconds left on the clock. It's understandable he made this mistake, but of course, Arjun is going to start bishop g3, hitting the king and forcing the king back to either g1, h1, or h3. None of those squares are very attractive. If you go to h3, then bishop d7 could be deadly on the spot. Instead, king g1 chosen, but now Arjun, knight to e2, jumping in with the other knight. Of course, now you can't go to h2. It's covered by the bishop. You can't go to f2, also covered by the bishop and the knight. Therefore, king to h1 is the only move. And now we have the key move, knight to f2. Look at this. The knight on e2 covering g1. The bishop on g3 covering h2. That means the only move is to give up the exchange with the move rook takes f2. So, rook takes f2 played in the game. We have bishop takes f2, and then here, finally, bishop takes b7 for Magnus, trying to win back a pawn, but Arjun, he is just completely dominating here thanks to his outside pass pawn on the a file, the alpha 0 star pawn, and here Arjun has got a simple plan, a5, intending a4, a3, a2, and then a1, promoting to a queen, and it's going to be almost impossible for Magnus to stop this in this position. All right, now here, knight d5 is the move for Magnus, down 2 pawns. He's trying to defend, not looking good. Knight g3 for Arjun, hitting the king on the h1 square. King to h2, the king marches up, and then knight e4, dropping back with the knight and pressuring the bishop. If Arjun can get some more pieces off the board, I mean, imagine there are no pieces but the pawns here. Arjun obviously would have a completely winning king and pawn endgame. Therefore, white has to avoid those piece trades at all costs. So, bishop e7, the bishop trying to dominate the knight on, this side of the board, a decent idea. Then we have bishop d7, getting the bishop off the back rank. King to h1, the king drops back. Bishop e6 pressures the knight. Again, white's got to avoid those trades. Even giving up the bishop pair and the light square bishop for the knight would be good for black here because of how much material he is up by. All right, we have knight to f4. The knight drops back and pressures the bishop on e6, but black simply goes bishop f5, getting out of the attack. Now we finally have king to h2, and then finally, the last move of the game, bishop g3, hits the king, and in this position, Magnus Carlsen, he simply resigns to Arjun Erigaisi. There's virtually no stopping this pawn on the queen side. The computer says it's pretty much all but over in this position, and for that reason, he simply resigns on the spot to Magnus Carlsen. Wow, what a game between Magnus and Arjun Erigaisi in this Freestyle Friday tournament. I mean, Arjun being nowhere near as highly rated in freestyle chess as he is in classical chess. Here he's only, 2622 rating versus his normal rating of nearly 2800. So very impressive seeing him pull off a victory as black against Magnus in freestyle chess. Not necessarily his strong suit, but he got it done in this game. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash that like button. Comment down below what you thought of the game, and got some big things planned for this channel, a complete rebranding, got a school community coming up, so stay tuned for all of that. I think you guys are gonna love this stuff, so just stay tuned. It should be coming this month, and I'll see you in the next video.